Today's video, we're ranking the 10 best family neighborhoods in all of Metro Vancouver. This is my personal opinion about the best spots for families to live. We're gonna start with number 10 and work our way down to number 1. I'm gonna talk about prices, I'm gonna talk about great areas to live, why you might wanna live in these areas and why you may want to avoid them. Every single one of these is gonna come down to your personal decision. And this is a video, if you're a family moving to Metro Vancouver, you just can't afford to miss. Let's get into all of it right now. My name is Sebastian Albrecht with the Living in Vancouver BC team, and welcome back to the channel. I put out videos just like this one about moving to and living in Vancouver every single week. And this week we're exploring what are some of the best family neighborhoods, not just in the city of Vancouver, but in all of Metro Vancouver. And where are we going to find those neighborhoods? This is a very difficult thing. If you're moving here from somewhere else, or even if you live in parts of Metro Vancouver, you may not fully know or be aware of what it's like living in other parts and what is drawing people to other parts around Metro Vancouver. So that is something that I'm trying to explore in this video. And of course, this is pretty subjective. I am giving you my personal opinion. I can give you a little idea of where I'm coming from. I have lived in Vancouver my entire life. I was born and raised here. I've been a real estate agent for nearly 20 years, and I've helped hundreds of families move to Vancouver and find not only the right neighborhood, but also the right home. And I myself have 4 young children. I obviously haven't always been a dad. I haven't always had a family. There were periods in my life where I was single or where I was in a couple and I was living as a young professional, but now I myself have 4 young children. So these are things that not only am I dealing with personally and professionally, people around me are dealing with, and also I personally am thinking about all the time. And this is where I am coming to you with these ideas about the best family neighborhoods in Metro Vancouver. And we're going to start at number 10, and then we're going to work our way down to number 1. And we're going to do that by interacting with Google Maps. And I'm going to show you, I'm going to walk you around the map, what it's like living in each of these areas and where they are, some of the pros and the cons of living in these areas, and also more importantly, I think for many of you thinking of buying a home, is what do these places cost? How much do you need to expect to pay in order to live in some of these fantastic family neighborhoods? So without any more explanation, let's get into the meat of it. And here we are with the map of Metro Vancouver, and we're going to look very specifically at the areas within Metro Vancouver that are the best places for families to live. I'm starting with number 10. Number 10 is the West End, and the West End we're going to find right in this little corner right over here. And that's a very small part. You can see this is the city. Woo, that's the city of Vancouver right there. And we're just looking at a very small part of the downtown peninsula, which is the West End. And why am I talking about the West End? Many people wouldn't think of the West End as being a very family-friendly neighborhood. I personally think it's a fantastic family neighborhood. And let's zoom in here. So we see that's the downtown peninsula. And once again, this right here is the West End. And the West End, you're going to find not a lot of houses. And this is a reason that maybe a lot of people wouldn't put it at the top of mind for a family-friendly neighborhood, because a lot of families want to live in houses. But the reality is, in a place as dense as Vancouver and as a place as expensive as Vancouver, many people aren't living in houses anymore with families. They just can't afford to do it. And in the West End, it's an area where you don't see a lot of houses. Not only are the ones that exist quite expensive, but there's just so few of them anymore. So this is a very densely populated area. I'm going to talk about the typical cost of properties in the West End. So we're not going to talk about houses at all because they don't really exist. Townhouses, a typical townhouse in the West End is just over $1.25 million. It's $1,266,800 in the West End. And then condos are, a typical condo at the beginning of 2025 is $669,300. And so these are pretty good values, I would say, for being in such a central location, because look at this, you're right next to downtown Vancouver, which is right there. So this is an area that a lot of people are drawn to because of its incredibly central location, its high degree of walkability. So pro number 1 is really that central location. You're right at the heart of the city. You can walk to an office downtown. You can walk over here to Stanley Park. You have access to beaches right over here. There's English Bay Beach. And so there's everything at your doorstep and all the conveniences of being downtown. There's also schools, of course, and daycares and all of the amenities that you might want for children, including community centers. If you have a dog, there's dog walks, there's places to walk your dog, but it is a highly densely populated area. And so pros are that central location, that proximity to nature, that access to places like Stanley Park or parks. Being able to just head very quickly to the north here into the mountains is a very quick jaunt as well. A lot of people that will live in the West End won't even have cars because of just how walkable and how accessible everything is. So those are the three big pros. The three main cons would be that it's really too urban for some people. And if you don't want to be in an urban environment, if you don't want to give up that extra space, that outdoor space that you might want your children to be playing in, then perhaps living in the West End isn't going to be the best option for you. Now, keep in mind, if you do live here with children, the outdoors is accessible right outside, but you're unlikely to have a patch of grass for your kids to play in, to play with a ball or to play with your puppy or your cat or something like that. That's unlikely to be your experience living in the West End. You may not be able to get into schools and daycares because there are more families that live in a highly densely populated neighborhood. There's a lot of competition for the school places as well as the daycare spots. And so that can be a detractor of living in the West End. And you might find, even though the school might be within a couple blocks of you, you might end up having to go to schools over here and having to drive your children to those schools. And then the third big con is that there are no houses, and that corollary where a lot of families want to be in a house ultimately. If that is your end goal, you're just not going to find it in the West End, unfortunately. Number 9 on the list is South Surrey White Rock. And where do we find that? Well, it's way down. Well, actually, it's not even on the screen yet. It's over here. That is South Surrey White Rock in this vicinity. So you can see downtown Vancouver is way up there. And in South Surrey, what you're going to find is a lot more affordability. You're going to find a typical house. And if you want a house, this is a place that a lot of people who start in the West End, perhaps before they have children, may end up desiring to move all the way down to South Surrey White Rock, where you're going to be able to find a house for a typical price in the spring of 2025 for $1,844,400. A typical townhouse would be $927,500. So you can see already there, we're looking at about a $300,000 difference between being in the West End and being in South Surrey White Rock. And condos, you're going to look at about $609,400. So one of the big pros of moving out to a place like South Surrey is considerably more affordability, much more space. And that's what is, if that is a priority for you, you're going to start looking at, I'm not going to be in this area because I want more space. So I'm going to start looking further out in these directions to see what I can afford and what these areas offer me. And one of the areas that people really look to is South Surrey White Rock because of that affordability, because of the kind of space you're going to be able to get. And in many cases, you know, what you're able to buy as a half duplex in the central areas of the city of Vancouver, you're going to be able to find a pretty nice newer house with a big yard, and it's going to be yours entirely in an area like South Surrey and White Rock. So those bigger homes are a big pro. The access to schools and activity is another big pro. So do you remember when I was talking about being in the West End, that one of the cons is having to fight for those spaces in daycares and in schools? Well, that's not really the case in South Surrey and White Rock. There's much more space in those schools, in those activities. There's a lot more that is geared towards family living in South Surrey. And as a result, it becomes much more convenient. And so you're not going to have to worry about being able to get into schools. You're not going to worry as much about getting into daycares or after school programs or, you know, into a sports program or what have you. There's going to be a lot more variety and options for families in South Surrey than there would be in the West End, or at least the ability to get into them will be much easier in South Surrey. And then also another big pro of living down there would be the access to the water. And just let's zoom in a little bit. So down here in South Surrey White Rock, you have some of the best beaches that you're going to find in all of Metro Vancouver. Right over there, Crescent Beach, and right over here in White Rock. So those two areas, you're going to find some of the best beaches in all of Metro Vancouver. And Boundary Bay, this body of water I've talked about in a number of my videos, is one of the warmest bodies of water that you're going to find really north of Los Angeles. It is very shallow, and so the sun warms it up quite a bit. And especially in the summer months, this is an area that becomes really spectacular and thriving. Crescent Beach and White Rock specifically are summer destinations for people all around Metro Vancouver. And of course, if you live right next door to them, it becomes a wonderful amenity for people that live down here in South Surrey White Rock. Now, in terms of cons, let us zoom out a little bit once again. There we go, zooming out. Now, one of the biggest cons is, as you can see for Metro Vancouver, this is one of the areas right down here that's about as far away as you can get from over here. And so if you are commuting, if you're not working from home and you do happen to work in downtown Vancouver, this distance is really going to be one of the things that people struggle with. And especially if you want to do away with a car, that's not really an option for living in South Surrey, White Rock. Yes, there are pockets of South Surrey and White Rock that are walkable, and you will have things, shopping and banks and restaurants within walking distance, especially in White Rock. But for most people living in South Surrey, White Rock, that's not really the experience. And that's not the thing that they're looking for when they move there. The SkyTrain runs from here over to here in Surrey, and it doesn't run all the way down here. So if you want to get away without a car, you're looking at probably an hour and a half or so, maybe 2 hours to commute into the city of Vancouver. And even with the car at your best, it's going to take about 45 minutes without traffic. Could take as long as an hour and a half. And so those are the biggest cons of living down here. And you may want to take that into account depending on how you feel. The other thing I think that you want to think about is if you're moving to Metro Vancouver for accessibility to the mountains, if you love skiing, if you love hiking, if you just love being up in the mountains, this isn't a place that's as connected to the mountains as you're going to find in other parts of Metro Vancouver. It is much more ocean oriented, and the mountains are way up here. And so that's quite a distance to get to. And of course, if this is just something you want to do every odd weekend to get up into the mountains, well, that's not really a big deal. But if you want to be getting up there after work every day and you have children, that's not really all that feasible when you live that far south. So that is something to think about. Oh, and I forgot one of the other big pros, and I talk about this a fair amount, is that the amount of precipitation that you get in South Surrey, White Rock is a lot less than what you get up here in sort of the northern edges of Metro Vancouver. You're getting in Lynn Valley up here almost triple the amount of rain that you're going to get down here in White Rock. And you're getting about 30% more sunlight down here in White Rock than you do up here in Lynn Valley. So that is a pretty distinct difference, something you want to keep in mind if you're looking around Metro Vancouver at places you want to live. We are now on number 8. I'm going to talk about somewhere in one of those more northern areas, and that is Heritage Mountain, and that is in Port Moody. So we're looking sort of up here in this little corner of Metro Vancouver as I zoom in a little more. And so right here is Port Moody, and we are looking at this area of Port Moody right up here. And this is one of those parts of Metro Vancouver that's a little more affordable. So you're going to find a typical house in Heritage Woods. There's not a ton of them. There's a little more orientation towards townhouses than anything else, but there are houses up here. The typical house is $2,011,100. A typical townhouse is about half that. It's $1,088,200. And we don't have anything in terms of condos. If you want a condo, you're going to find that the condos are actually down in this area mostly, and that's where you're going to be able to find condos in this area. So mainly townhouses, a lot of houses. The big draws for living in Heritage Mountain would be its access to nature. And so once again, let's zoom out a little bit here, but you can see all of that green space up here. That is all nature. And so if you want to get up in the hiking trails, if you want to go over to Sasamat Lake over here, if you want to get into Bunsen Lake over here, these are areas that are going to be right in your back door and really easily accessible. And as I was saying about South Surrey, one of the things here is that your orientation is much more to the mountains than it is to the ocean. But you can see you are quite right at the end here of ocean. And so you do have that accessibility. Of course, Port Moody is named Port Moody because it is an active port and it is accessible to the ocean. Let's clean this up a little bit. And I will highlight once again sort of the area that we're talking about right up here. That is roughly Heritage Woods. And another enormous attraction here is the quality of the schools. And there really are some immensely popular and highly rated schools in this area. So a lot of people do love moving to Port Moody because they're thinking about the quality of the schools. So it's probably one of the areas that has the best sort of balance between value and the quality of school. As I mentioned, just over $1 million is what you can find for a townhouse. And these townhouses quite often, because they're not brand new, they are many times built about 15 to 25 years ago. They're a little bit larger, and you can find townhouses up here that are quite frankly larger than the house that I live in. And many houses in Metro Vancouver are smaller than some of the townhouses you're going to find up here. So that value to affordability balance is something that draws a lot of people to this Heritage Mountain area. And I do want to give sort of recognition to a couple other areas, also Westwood Plateau here and Burke Mountain over here. And these are both also very popular areas, but I'm concentrating a little more on that Heritage Mountain, Heritage Woods area because of the quality of schools. Burke Mountain doesn't have those yet. It does have newer townhouses, newer houses, if that's something that you're looking for, but it doesn't have quite the same weight of schools and quite the same value. And so that's why I'm focusing a little more on Heritage Mountain. Now, in terms of cons, what you're going to find is it's not really all that walkable. You do have to get up onto the mountain, and you're away from what is the walkable area, which is more down here. In addition, you're a little bit tucked away. You're not super central. And let's move out once again. Let's clear this. So you can see where we are tucked up here. And so as a result, you're not in this sort of central zone that it becomes a lot easier to go up north. It becomes a lot easier to head out east and to go south. So you're very much at sort of the northern end of Metro Vancouver, which makes getting around a little more challenging. And the traffic along here can be really horrendous. And so that is something to take into account, that traffic in and out around here isn't super bad. It's just getting up the mountain or down the mountain can be intense, specifically at rush hour periods when everybody else is trying to do the same thing. But it's really about that central location that I would say is one of the cons. And then of course, also the weather. And I mentioned that a little bit when I was talking about South Surrey, where that's a pro. So if you're looking at Port Moody and specifically Heritage Mountain, you're getting up onto the North Shore Mountains where you are going to find it's a little wetter, it's a little darker, not as much sunshine. And if that's something that you're sensitive to, that's something that you do want to be aware of. Okay, so now we're moving on to number 7, and that would be Walnut Grove in Langley. And so there's Vancouver, then we have Surrey, and over here we have Langley. And Walnut Grove is right up top on the northern edge of Langley. Let's zoom in a little bit here. Right there we have Walnut Grove. Another area that you're going to hear people talk about that people really love is Fort Langley, and it's a super cute little town. I don't love it as a place to live necessarily. It's a fantastic place to visit, but it is a little bit touristy. Walnut Grove has this proximity to Fort Langley, which is amazing. There's a lot of development right along the highway, and that is amazing as well. But first, before I get into the pros and the cons, let's talk about the real estate. And so you find in Walnut Grove, a typical house is $1,442,800. Typical townhouse is $858,900, and a typical apartment is $579,800. And so the attraction to Walnut Grove is really the quality of schools, the quality of it being a family neighborhood with family amenities all around it, a reputation for really good schools, as well as sort of this location that lends itself really well to getting around Metro Vancouver. And so once again, if we zoom out a little bit, you see right there, that's Highway 1. And right there is Walnut Grove. So it's really easy to hop on the highway and then take the highway into the city. And so, if you live down at the bottom of Langley or at the bottom of Surrey, and you need to get up into Vancouver or really anywhere else in Metro Vancouver, that commute through Surrey or through Langley can be really intense. And that is one of the things that people enjoy about Walnut Grove, is that ability to hop on the highway and get into the city quite easily, or conversely, get out of the city quite easily and maybe get into the Okanagan or further out into the valley. And that ease of transition throughout Metro Vancouver is really great. And we also more recently have the construction of this here, which is the Golden Years Bridge, getting you to the northern side. And that used to be much more challenging for people that lived in this area, but now has become a lot easier. So if you need to work in Port Coquitlam or over in Pitt Meadows or Maple Ridge, living in Walnut Grove becomes a lot more convenient because of the addition of the Golden Years Bridge. So those are a lot of the pros. And I should mention, similar to South Surrey, it's that the value. And we're talking about $1.5 million for a pretty nice house in a really nice family neighborhood. That's something that we don't find too often around Metro Vancouver, and becomes a real draw for people looking at how can I stretch my dollar furthest here? And as I mentioned, it's not just houses, but it's also townhouses and apartments. You are going to find generally the housing stock here is a little bit older. It's a little bit bigger. More recently, we've seen more development of townhouses and even condo development in this area of Langley. And Langley is changing tremendously. What we're not going to find here is access to the SkyTrain. And that is something that you're going to get further south in Langley, and further south again in a little bit in the newer, or the original SkyTrain is in the northeastern corner of Surrey, but they're moving it further south towards Langley. But in terms of Langley, you're only going to be able to access the SkyTrain in the southern parts and central parts of Langley, not up here in the north. So that might be one of the cons for people when they're looking at Walnut Grove. So now we're looking at number 6. And where's number 6? We're looking sort of in a very central part of Metro Vancouver. We're going back to New Westminster and Queen's Park, very specifically in New Westminster, one of my favorite little pockets. Queen's Park is a real gem in Metro Vancouver. Queen's Park is right here where I've just zoomed in. That is Queen's Park itself, and Queen's Park is, roughly this area. And mostly what you're going to find in Queen's Park is a lot of single family residential homes. A lot of it is very old, and it's a little bit like Shaughnessy in the city of Vancouver. This is really the affordable Shaughnessy, and the Shaughnessy is an area where you might find houses that are $5 million, $10 million. Queen's Park is considerably more affordable, with a typical house being $2,117,700. We don't have any townhouses in Queen's Park, but we do have some apartments just on the edge, and you're looking at about $716,900 in the Queen's Park area. One of the unusual things about Queen's Park is that it is really this prestigious family-oriented, single-family detached neighborhood that is really close to some of the most urban areas in Metro Vancouver. And New Westminster, I find, it draws a lot of people that enjoy urban lifestyles, and it is an older urban location similar to downtown Vancouver. In fact, it was the first provincial capital, and so as a result, there's a lot of history in New Westminster. So people that love old architecture and sort of that older, naturally developing urban lifestyle, that exists in New Westminster. And you have this walkability to some of the real urban amenities in New Westminster. And so right here along 6th is where you're going to find a lot of that. And so you have that proximity for the people that live in these single family residential areas. They can get here to the amenities. You have great schools. You have relative affordability for something that is generally quite luxurious. You have that proximity to Queen's Park. You also have a lot of relative proximity to SkyTrain and an ability to get really anywhere in Metro Vancouver. That's one of the things about New Westminster, is that it is so centrally located. That is something that people really do love about being in New Westminster. You can see you're right at the heart of Metro Vancouver there. And the SkyTrain crosses right through New Westminster, and a number of main arteries cross through New Westminster as well, making this an area that draws people who want that accessibility around Metro Vancouver. Quality of schools is good, value is good. I'd say one of the detractors, people might feel that there's a little too much homelessness in New Westminster. You're not going to feel that necessarily in Queen's Park. You are going to feel, though, one of the big things that I think is a drawback of living in New Westminster is the amount of traffic you get. Because it is at the crossroads of Metro Vancouver, there can be quite a lot of traffic that impacts, people getting right over here on the Patello, getting in and out of Surrey, trying to get over to Richmond, trying to get into Vancouver, over into Burnaby. New Westminster, very much, as I keep saying, is at the crossroads of everything. And because of that, it can become very difficult to get in and out of. But if you don't need to go anywhere, or if you can rely on being on the SkyTrain, then that isn't a worry for you. Then Queen's Park in New Westminster should be an area that you are thinking about when you're looking at the best family neighborhoods in Metro Vancouver. So if you are trying to find the right place to live, don't forget that I am a real estate agent that has helped hundreds of families move to Vancouver and find the right areas and find the right homes. I can help you and your family as well. Over my nearly 20-year career, I've finely tuned my ability to help people do exactly what you're looking to do. So whenever you're ready and you want my help, if you just want to figure out a little more information about some of the areas that I'm talking about and really hone down on the right home, the right street in the right neighborhood, feel free to reach out anytime. But for now, let's get back to the video. We're talking about number 5. We're in the top 5 now. I'm super excited. These are some of my favorite family neighborhoods. And number 5, we're getting right into North Vancouver and Lonsdale, specifically in North Vancouver. I'm going to combine Lonsdale in general. So where is North Vancouver? Well, once again, we see Vancouver there, and right up there is North Vancouver, to, funny enough, the north of Vancouver. So let's zoom in here. And Lonsdale is very much kind of the central area of North Vancouver. And Lonsdale runs, it takes a little bend here, and it runs right up here. So it's one of the longer roads you're gonna find going north-south in North Vancouver or on the North Shore in general. And it's very much sort of the central business district of North Vancouver. And so it's this proximity that I think is highly desirable for families, because a lot of young families or a lot of families want some degree of walkability. Not everybody wants to be in an ultra suburban environment, which you might find in other parts of North Vancouver. I mean, it's not all parts. So you have Lower Lonsdale, which is down here. So in Lower Lonsdale, what you're going to find is a little more condos and townhouses, a little less terms of houses have been built here, but you do still see a bunch sort of in this zone in particular. And then Central Lonsdale is right here. And then Upper Lonsdale is considered this area up here above the highway. So those 3 zones are all very popular family neighborhoods. Let's talk about prices. You're going to look, and specifically for Central Lonsdale is these numbers that I'm taking, because these 3 areas are all slightly different. But Central Lonsdale, you're going to find a typical house is $2,068,800. A typical townhouse is $1,368,400. And a typical apartment condo is $826,100. And what you're going to find is quite a lot of options, whether it's a house, condo, or townhouse. If you want a duplex, all these housing types are found in this area. And this is one of the things that I think a lot of families like, because if you can't afford a house, but you want to live in a walkable, good, family-oriented neighborhood, well, with good schools, then this is a zone that you're going to be considering, because you can find relatively affordable condominiums. Like a good quality 2-bedroom condominium won't cost you as much here as it would in downtown Vancouver, as an example. The other thing that people, aside from value, aside from the walkability, they really like the quality of the schools. And that's something that North Vancouver, specifically in the North Shore in general, is really known for. A lot of people are drawn to these areas because of schooling in particular, but it's also the access to the outdoors. And once again, unlike South Surrey, where we were talking about, it's much more oriented to the water, in North Vancouver, you're much more oriented to the mountains. And that makes sense, because North Vancouver is right on the mountains. And so North Vancouver's right there, and all that green space right up above, that is all mountain. But this is where one of those cons comes in. And so one of the big cons I find for people in North Vancouver that you really want to consider is the weather. And if you're somebody that is really susceptible to feeling down in darkness and cold, rainy winter weather, this is an area that you're going to feel a little more of that than some other areas like South Surrey, White Rock, or Tawasin as an example, where there's a lot more sunshine. But not everybody cares. Not everybody finds that a con. Some people actually really come to Metro Vancouver wanting to be essentially in the rainforest. And so if that's an experience you want, Lonsdale is not necessarily the wettest, rainiest part. That's actually more areas like Deep Cove and Lynn Valley up here. But down here, the weather sort of, especially down in Lower Lonsdale, is much more similar to downtown Vancouver. And it's not, you're basically just a 15-minute ferry ride from one side to the other. And so the result is that at lower Lonsdale, I wouldn't say that's an enormous con, but the higher up Lonsdale you go, it becomes a bigger and bigger issue. And the other big con of living over here really is the traffic. And I mention it every single time that I talk about North Vancouver, but for so many parts of Metro Vancouver, this is something that you do need to think about and what your commutes are going to be like. And I do talk about like trying to avoid bridges if you can. And if you want to live in North Vancouver and you don't need to commute for work, you work from home a lot, or maybe you work in North Vancouver, then it really doesn't matter or matter as much. But there's only this bridge over here, the Lions Gate, and this one over here. We mostly call it the Second Narrows, but officially it's called the Ironworkers Memorial Bridge. These two bridges are really the only two ways across by car. There is a ferry, you see that little dotted line in between, that can take you across as a passenger, which is great if you live on Lonsdale specifically, which is again the reason that I really draw attention to Lonsdale. I do want to give a little bit of mention over here. There's Edgemont Village, and over here Deep Cove, and also Lynn Valley up here. These three areas are definitely very desirable family areas as well, but I only want to break this down to very specific areas, and just for trying to keep this video relatively short, but these are areas in North Vancouver that a lot of families are also drawn to. Area number 4, we're moving a little bit closer to Vancouver once again, and we're going to go back to Burnaby, and specifically an area of Burnaby up here, northern Burnaby. So I'd say this is Burnaby Heights and Capitol Hill, a little bit of Brentwood as well, sort of the northern edges of Brentwood. This is another one of those very, very popular family neighborhoods. And we're going to find in northern Burnaby, a typical house costs $2,155,000. A townhouse is $911,900, and an apartment is $745,700. So what draws people to this area? This is one of those neighborhoods, as many of the most walkable neighborhoods in the city of Vancouver are. This was oriented towards the development of the tram system that we had many years ago before we sort of converted to buses and then put a little more emphasis on making commuting by car and building out the highway system. So this is still one of those old tram oriented neighborhoods that is at the forefront of people's minds when they're looking around Vancouver as the most walkable neighborhoods. That area of Burnaby Heights is really one of the most interesting, cute, walkable, family-oriented neighborhoods that you're going to find not in Vancouver, but incredibly close to Vancouver. And so one of the main pros is that it's incredibly walkable. We're going to zoom in here a little more. The main area that you're going to be looking at for businesses is right there along Hastings Street. Of course, you also have big mall down here, a lot of development going on in Brentwood. So if you're living in this Willingdon Heights area or up here in Brentwood, you're sort of in between the two, and that's pretty convenient. That's kind of nice. Up here, where I really like is Burnaby Heights and Capitol Hill. You're a little bit further from that convenience of accessing what Brentwood has, and specifically the SkyTrain, I think, which runs right along there. So one of the big pros is that walkability. Its central location, you can see once again, we're right here along the highway. So getting up into the North Shore Mountains is super easy, going out to Whistler or onto the ferry, but also out of the city and heading up into the Okanagan as an example. All those things are relatively easy when you're living in this area. And then of course, as we keep talking about in many of these areas, it's the quality of schools. And so many people see this area of Burnaby as having one of the best accesses to high quality schools, which similar to North Vancouver, schools in this area have an excellent reputation. And a lot of people then want to move this area because of that access for their children to get into these schools. In terms of cons, traffic's going to be one of those things. You're right on the highway, and if you need to access the highway and even just getting on and off the highway, the traffic right over here, over here, over here, and over here, right along Lougheed Highway or Hastings, those are two arterials that become really backed up as people are trying to get around in rush hour traffic. And so it's not really a unique experience. I do think in general, I prefer the idea, and I would encourage people, if you need to commute to downtown Vancouver as an example, you don't have to cross any bridges when you live in northern Burnaby, which I think is an amazing asset. I think that proximity to the SkyTrain, you're not right on the SkyTrain line, but you have relatively quick access to it. So it's right there, which I think is a relative pro, but I'm stretching a little bit to try and find some cons. And as we get into these top 3 or 4 neighborhoods for families, I'm really struggling, honestly, with coming up with cons. So traffic, I would say, is a bit of a con here. And then also development. development. A lot of development happening along Hastings up here and along Lougheed down here. And this is when Brentwood is one of the quote unquote downtown centers of Burnaby that the city really wants to see a lot more density and a lot more development. And it really is astonishing at what is being built around Brentwood. It means that there's an access for you though to stuff that is really, really new and really highly desirable. So amazing amenities like buildings with basketball courts and swimming pools and bowling lanes, crazy amounts of amenities. But then getting up here, really quiet, single family detached neighborhood that is a very different experience than living here in Brentwood. And so that is something that I think a lot of people are drawn to this area of northern Burnaby because they have this variety of access. Depending on what your budget is, what kind of lifestyle you want to live, you get all the benefits of this family-oriented neighborhood, but very different kind of types of housing that you can live in. And now we're moving into my top 3 favorite family neighborhoods. These are the best family neighborhoods that you're going to find in all of Metro Vancouver and really some of the most hotly contested real estate that you're going to find. And so these are going to be really dependent on your budget because they are so hotly contested, because they are so popular. Prices do tend to be higher in these neighborhoods, and that is going to be one of the cons for them, of course. And number 3 that we're getting into is Kitsilano. And Kitsilano, we're moving back into Vancouver. It's going to be one of the best known parts of Metro Vancouver. Kitsilano is right down here in this approximate zone. That is Kitsilano. So in Kitsilano, you're going to find this is the priciest real estate that we've seen up to this point. A typical house in Kitsilano is $2,683,400. A typical townhouse is $1,355,000, and an apartment is $744,700. So if you are price conscious, this is not an area that you're going to want to consider. You're going to want to consider, as I talked about earlier, moving out into some more outlying areas. But why is this so popular? Why do families love living here? I would say once again, it's this combination of value. There are people who see the value in paying more for some of the benefits that they're getting here. And one of the big ones would be its proximity to downtown Vancouver, which is right here. And so that commute is super easy. It is walkable, it is bikeable. Certainly by car, it's not that bad, although I would say crossing that bridge can be a bit of a hassle as a morning commute. And so, you might find if you live in a house here in Kitts Point or in a condo here, that looks like a super easy commute, but it could take you half an hour just to get out of here, over the bridge and into downtown. So why do it, right? You might as well take your bike, get a bit of exercise, or go for a brisk walk and get over there. The buses are great, but there is no SkyTrain right here. So let's get into more of the pros. The pros are that it's walkable. You have the central business district that's along 4th and along Broadway, right along here. So there's a lot that you're going to find. Some great cafes, some great restaurants, lots of things for families to do, get the kids out of the house. The proximity to the beaches is a big advantage. And that's not something that you're going to find everywhere, but you have Kitts Beach right there. You also have Jericho, and you're getting into Spanish Banks over here. I mean, that's not technically Kitsilano anymore, but they are super easily accessible. And for the experience of living in a lot of other parts of not only Metro Vancouver, but even in the city of Vancouver, is that you don't have such quick, easy access to beaches. And that is one of the things where so many people come to Vancouver from so many other parts of the world and of North America, and they want that proximity to the beach. And that's why I find so many people are drawn to living in the West End and Kitsilano specifically when they move here, because they want that draw to the beaches. And I can tell you personally, I don't live that far away. Let me give you an idea. But I'm basically in this zone up here, and we're talking about living in Kitsilano. And for me, I would take the kids to the beach in the middle of the summer, and I want to get over here to Spanish Banks. That getting from over here takes about 45 minutes in the middle of the summer. And so obviously, if you live here, getting right to the beach is super easy. It could be a 10-minute walk. It could be a 5-minute car ride. You really don't need to be driving if you live in Kitsilano. So that is also an advantage of being in Kitsilano. You're not as car dependent as you are in many other parts of Metro Vancouver. What are the cons? Well, we talked about cost of housing in Kitsilano can be fairly high, and that can be one of the cons. It's not going to be for everyone. There's a lot of student housing. That can be another con. And so let's look at the proximity to UBC. UBC is out here a lot of the housing in Kitsilano has been oriented towards student housing for quite a lot of time. There hasn't always been a lot of housing out at UBC. They're doing a much better job of that. And so you're going to find a lot of the basement suites, a lot of the apartments that are rented out in Kitsilano are rented to students. And so for that reason, that the feeling of living in Kitsilano can be a little bit, it's not as settled. There's a lot of people moving in and out, a lot of young energy, which you may really enjoy, but it's not as settled as an area like you might find over here on Main Street, Riley Park, or South Surrey, White Rock as an example. So those are slightly different experiences. And then the other big con I would say is that it's not really all that central. And that is the experience that people have really when they're living anywhere on the west side of Vancouver. People love living in that area because of the quality of the schools, because of the access to the water, and you're still relatively close to downtown. But if you want to get to other parts of Metro Vancouver, it's much more challenging. And you're not really, there's no SkyTrain in this zone, right? And so, especially in that Kitsilano area, you got to get downtown to access the SkyTrain, or you have to head further east to access the SkyTrain. Now, that is changing as we build out the SkyTrain system along the Broadway corridor, and it is going to stop in Kitsilano along Broadway, it's relatively central, and there will be stops in Kitsilano that will make living in Kitsilano much more convenient in the next couple of years. And that feeling of not being as central won't be as much of a con. And once again, I just want to point out, I'm really struggling to come up with cons to some of these top 3 or 4 areas, but this is one of the things that I'd be thinking about. Area number 2, the second best family neighborhood, in my opinion, in all of Metro Vancouver is Riley Park, Little Mountain. And that is an area that goes by a few different names, but it is approximately in this zone right there. And that is also known just as Main Street. And this is an incredibly central area you can see in the city of Vancouver. And what is the typical cost? We're looking at a house being $2,203,200. Typical townhouse or duplex being $1,287,300. Typical apartment being $980,100. So this isn't the most affordable part of the city, but why do people love it? Because it is incredibly walkable. It is a bit of a hip, trendy, cool area. There's a lot of stuff going on along Main Street. Also, Fraser gets a little bit of the hip, fun areas are a little bit further north, but you're still within easy reach of it. You're still within this walkable part. And Riley Park, Little Mountain is sort of the older brother to Mount Pleasant, which is this area down here, which I would say can also be a family-oriented neighborhood, but does veer a little bit younger to a hipper crowd perhaps, most likely childless, most likely sort of upwardly mobile young professionals living in an area like Mount Pleasant that want quick and easy access into downtown, also along the SkyTrain to all other parts of Metro Vancouver. And so as those guys grow up a little bit, then they want to move a little bit further south into this zone, into Riley Park, Little Mountain, where we're going to find the pricing of housing, as I mentioned, but this real central location, this walkability, those are massive amounts of the popularity of the area. The access to downtown is super quick and easy, and also the quality of the schools. And this isn't an area that I would say has the highest quality of schools, but it is at the upper echelon of schools in the city of Vancouver in terms of reputation. And the people that live in this area all have a certain degree of success in their lives, a certain degree of education, where they're promoting that idea with their children as well. And they want their kids to have a good education and be surrounded by that. They all have that as a priority or generally as a group. In terms of some of the cons of living in Riley Park, Little Mountain for families, it would really be the cost. This is one of the more expensive areas that you're going to be looking at. As we talked about the housing costs, it is also an area that is quite busy. And so if you are not wanting to be in a densely populated, walkable neighborhood, this is an area where we're seeing more and more density. This is not as suburban, I would say, even as North Burnaby or say Lynn Valley or South Surrey. So there's a little more condensed population here, and we are building more and more density. This is something that we are sort of on the verge of because of the popularity of the neighborhood. And then the other con, and again, I'm trying to stretch here in terms of trying to find cons for some of these areas, but you're not right on the SkyTrain line. So the area is centered on Main Street right there, but the SkyTrain SkyTrain runs along Cambie. So in my mind, that's not an enormous detractor because it is accessible. If you live over here, you can still walk to the SkyTrain station, which would be up here, right here at Cambie and King Edward. So it's within walking distance, or at the very least, you could take a Lyft or an Uber or an Evo or something and get over there. And so I myself, live in this area. And that's something that we do. So I don't personally find that as an enormous detractor to the living in the area, but it is something you want to think about. But for many people, this is one of the most popular family neighborhoods that you're going to find. And just as an example, as I was doing a little bit of research trying to think about some of these areas, I saw a comment on Reddit where people were talking about suggestions for the best family neighborhoods throughout Metro Vancouver. And one of the comments was, I would die to own a house in Riley Park, Little Mountain. And that is the feeling that so many families have. This is one of the areas truly that people would put at the very top of their list of the most desirable family-oriented neighborhoods if they're able to afford it. But let's move on to number one. Not sure if you've guessed it by omission at this point, but the number one family-oriented neighborhood, the most popular one, in my opinion, the area that if you have the budget for it, you should be focusing on is Douglas Park. And that's on the west side of Vancouver, small little corner of the city. It's right in here. And really, we could even more hyper define it by saying between 16th and King Edward and Oak and Cambie. But surrounding Douglas Park right here, this is an area that is the preeminent family-oriented neighborhood, I would say, for the last 10 to 20 years or so. If you have it within your budget, this is an area that many families want to be in. So what is the typical house in this area? It's $3,328,500. This isn't the most expensive area you're going to find in all of Metro Vancouver. And some people might argue that there are other family areas that we should focus on, but this is an area that people do want to be in, and they will fight tooth and nail to find a house within this little pocket, which is one of the reasons that we find single family detached so expensive here. In addition, a townhouse or a duplex would be $1,785,000, and an apartment would be $1,134,200. Again, all of these numbers are at the very high end or the highest numbers that we've seen of any of these family-oriented neighborhoods. So what is the real advantage of being here? Once again, similar to Riley Park, Little Mountain, it's this central location and in the city of Vancouver. So a lot of people will work and commute downtown. It's really easy to get down Cambie. You have the SkyTrain right there, or all sorts of bike paths. You can also head right down Granville into downtown Vancouver, but you can also head out to UBC relatively easily. You can head out to Burnaby and as well out to the airport if you got to go on a business trip or something like that. All of those things from this area are really, really easy. It's super walkable. You have incredible access, as I was just saying, but are right on the edge of Cambie Village here, which is one of those walkable neighborhoods that a lot of people target, similar to Main Street, similar to Fraser, similar to Kitsilano, say on West 4th. These are neighborhoods where there's a lot going on. There's great cafes, great little restaurants, places to buy your groceries, places to go to the bank. All of that is within an easy walkable distance from living in this area. And then, of course, as is common, basically, I think that the resounding theme of all of these areas is really the quality of the schools. And so this is an area, if you send your kids to school here, you're going to feel very confident that your kids are getting a really high quality education. And so those things in combination are what people really, really love about living here. The houses are cute. The streets are green and leafy and overhung with trees. There's tons of parks. Douglas Park is a great place for kids to go to. It's one of my kids' favorite places to go. So we spend a fair amount of time driving over to Douglas Park. We've had a ton of birthday parties from other kids around Vancouver going there. But what are the cons? Well, to be honest, I can only think of one. There's one main con, and that again, for many of these top family neighborhoods is very consistent, and that is just the cost. This is not an area that is within easy grasp of a lot of families that live in Metro Vancouver. And so for that reason, that becomes a difficult transition for a lot of people to move here. And so this may not be within your budget, unfortunately, but this is, in my opinion, the best family neighborhood that you're going to find in all of Metro Vancouver. But of course, if you want help finding the best family neighborhood that works within your budget and you want to move here, you want to buy a home, don't forget that I am a real estate agent that has helped hundreds of families do exactly what you're trying to do, and I can help you as well. So whenever you're ready, my contact information is right there on the screen. Be sure to reach out anytime. But if you're not quite ready, don't fret. I have you covered as well, because I have tons of information for you to devour all about moving to and living in Vancouver. I have over 100 videos, countless, endless hours of information all about living and moving here just for you. So be sure to check out my giant back catalog of videos and don't miss a single video. Be sure to like this video, hit the subscribe button. I am putting these videos out every single week, but there is one video that I want to make sure that you don't miss, because if you're moving here and you have a family, you want to make sure you're finding the right school for your family. And this is a video I did a while back all about the right schools in Metro Vancouver, finding the right schools in Metro Vancouver. It's right there on your screen. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you watching this video all the way to the end. I'll see you next week.